Welcome everybody to the Tynedale Local Area Council on Tuesday the 15th of February. Can I remind everyone here to have your phone switched off or on silent? Also, if you are not using your microphone, can you please make sure that's switched off as well? And as Nicola said, in case you didn't all hear, can you have them close enough so that they can pick up the sound you're making? Right then, we'll go to item 2, please. Apologies for absence, Nicola, please.
Hello everyone, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Oliver.
Okay, have we got everybody else, haven't we? Okay, right then, item 3, minutes please, just to confirm a true record. Great. Any questions? Right, Councillor Morford. This is checking that these are correct, by the way, it's not a comment on them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just to correct a very minor mistake in the minutes of the 11th of January. Yeah, page 7 of the minutes, and that's page 19 of the public document pack. I'd corrected a misleading statement in the Fire and Rescue Services Community Risk Management Plan. Bear with me and I'll tell you. It's just over halfway down, and I'd said that while there was expected to be fewer rainy days in summer, the amount of rain that fell on wet winter days would increase by 14 to 28%. We just need to insert the words "on wet winter days" after the words "the amount of rain that fell," and then it would read correctly. Thank you.
Did you have your hand up, Councillor Dale?
Yes, thank you. Just page 22 of the minutes of the report. Item agenda 9, local area council work programme.
Sorry, say that again?
Item agenda 9 on page 22.
Yeah.
Just to say that the minutes aren't correct, because actually I did ask if we could have a report at the next area committee, or one of them, to put on the programme about the review of the board lands work in Hexham, and that was refused, and I think that should be minuted, please. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're on that page, just as an aside, I believe, just correct this, but the L-Crips and the Biking people are coming to next month's meeting, is that correct?
That's correct, the 15th of March.
Yeah, okay. Thought I might as well mention seeing we were there. Okay, do we have any disclosure of members' interests? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, in that case, we'll go down to the planning section of this meeting, so I'll pass you over to Councillor Scott, Vice Chair Planning.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just go through the procedure of each planning application. So I'll introduce the application. We'll go to planning officers for changes or to recommendations. We'll then go to public speaking. Objectors will get 5 minutes. Local councillors or parish councillors will get 5 minutes. And the applicant or the supporter will also have 5 minutes. But this will be split. The 5 minutes will be split to how many of people are here to speak in those slots. Then we'll go to members' questions to planning officers. Then we'll go to, we will need a proposal, a seconder, so we can go to debate on each planning application. Then we'll be able to go to a vote. So I'll introduce the first planning application, which is 200425 FUL. Development of 9 residential dwellings, 100% affordable, including associated access, car parking, landscaping and all other ancillary works. Land north of Piper Road, Ovingham, Northumberland. So we'll go to Neil Armstrong to give us an update on this planning application.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just one update since the report and the agenda was published, and that's we've received a further objection from a Mr. Wallbank of 24 Piper Road, Ovingham. Just very briefly to summarise, this strongly opposes the development on the grounds of environmental destruction to the well-established old hedgerow, including impacts on nesting birds, and also the impact of the noise, disruption and heavy goods relating to these works with such close proximity to local houses is dangerous and affects residents' health and is unacceptable. So the application seeks full planning permission for 9 affordable dwellings on land located to the north of Piper Road, Ovingham, and with the proposed housing mix set out at paragraph 2.1 of the officer report. Just run through the presentation and slides. And there are just a few extra photographs from the pack that would have been sent out to members. But just to identify the application site there in red to the north of the slide there, so you can see the access through the existing housing to the west of the site, Piper Road to the south side, and Dean Close properties further to the west. And the application site edged in red there. This is the existing site plan submitted, so just to give an indication of the relationship with the housing to the west and some to the south. And also an aerial plan there, just a Google map image showing the site edged in red to the east side of the newest development there, the affordable housing scheme, also to the north of Piper Road. And just to show the relationship there with the rest of the village. Just to run through some photographs as well. So on the left hand side, just taken from Piper Road, and the red brick housing there is the recently constructed affordable housing. And on the right hand side, that's just taken from a similar spot, but just looking north towards the site, and you can see the extent of hedgerow running east along Piper Road. And again, just some views along Piper Road with the newly constructed housing on the left-hand side. The right-hand photograph is just to the edge of that scheme, and you can see an existing field gate into the proposed application site, and the hedgerow along Piper Road. Again, just a similar view on the left there, but on the right-hand side, this is taken at the corner to the eastern end of Piper Road. Just looking back, so the application site would be to the right-hand side of the hedge there. Properties to the left on Piper Road, and the red brick of the adjacent housing site. And again, just looking towards the site there on the left-hand side, beyond the hedge would be the application site. And just a relationship between some of the existing houses on the south side of Piper Road there on the left-hand side. And again, just taken from the vicinity of the new site, looking back towards existing properties on Piper Road, just to show the relationship with those properties and their access arrangements and layout. And this is looking, so there's an existing field gate into the site, so that's just looking into the area of the proposed housing. And then on the right hand side, just looking across the application site. And these are taken from the affordable housing to the west of the site, and from where the access would be taken, serving the new development as proposed. So this is the proposed site layout of the 9 properties. So there's 5 along the frontage there with Piper Road, and 4 to the rear of the site, and they just follow a very similar plan form and layout to the adjacent housing to the west. And just run through some of the house types. So we've got 2-bed bungalows, These are the 2-bed bungalows that would be found along the frontage of the site as well as some to the rear of the site. The 2-bed house type, which is along the frontage with Piper Road, and also the 4-bed house is located along the frontage. And these are just some site sections taken through, so just 3 sections. So on the left-hand side, it's given an indication of existing housing on Piper Road, and to the right, you can see an indicative section. There is a condition you'll see that's proposed within the recommendation about seeking further details of the finished floor levels if this was to be approved, and that is dependent upon some of the drainage arrangements as well. But this is given an indication of the separation between those properties and indicative finished levels. So the application site is located within the green belt, and the officer report sets out the main issues that have been considered in the assessment of the application following consultation and publicity. And this includes the overall principle of the development in the green belt, design and visual impact, residential amenity, sustainable transport and highway safety, ecology, drainage and flood risk, archaeology, ground conditions, and the proposed planning obligations. And as set out in the report, it is officer opinion that the proposals would result in limited affordable housing in line with rural exception site development plan policy, and could therefore be considered to be an exception to inappropriate development in the green belt, having regard to the NPPF. The location and scale of the development are felt to be well related to the village and existing housing, whilst an acceptable form of development can be achieved in terms of layout, scale, design and impacts on residential amenity. Furthermore, subject to conditions and appropriate mitigation as necessary, the proposal is also considered to be acceptable in respect of other matters such as highway safety, ecological impacts and flood risk and drainage, ecology and ground conditions. Planning obligations will also need to be secured through a Section 106 agreement as set out in the report. The proposal is therefore considered to result in an acceptable and sustainable form of development in this location, having regard to the development plan and the NPPF, and it's recommended that permission is granted subject to a Section 106 agreement and the conditions as set out within the recommendation within the officer report. Thank you, Chair.
So now we will go to Neville Gray, who would like to speak on this. So Neville, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ovington Parish Council wants to comment on house building in the Greenbelt, ecology and drainage issues linked to the visual impact of the new houses fronting Piper Road. Of course, house building in the Greenbelt is a contentious issue. The officer's report makes repeated references to this being a rural exception site, which at 9 dwellings is 1 short of the maximum allowed. But in the Greenbelt, north of Orangham, there are already the 22 dwellings to the west and other land still available to the east. And we are concerned that by gaming of planning policies and possible disaggregation of development to circumvent the NPPF, 40 dwellings could end up being built in the Greenbelt in that area. Turning to ecology, we welcome conditions 4 to 8 in the officer's report, but they only go to show the further loss of existing habitat should approval be granted. Natural hedgerow, which has developed over many years, would be replaced by new hedgerow, which would take considerable time to develop and would likely be manicured hedgerow, inferior in ecological terms. Regarding drainage, the application recognises that there are fundamental issues on this site about finished house floor levels. Consequently, the houses fronting Piper Road have to be raised above the actual site level. The drainage statement from consultant CK21 states the following: foul drainage will run via gravity to the existing combined sewer, and that exposing the existing sewer to confirm the invert level will determine finished floor levels of the houses fronting Piper Road. Invert levels have been assumed, and the properties fronting Piper Road are elevated. Now, significantly, condition 2 refers to both the CK21 report and its related drawing as approved plans, but these documents both contain caveats stating that the actual invert level is not known, and therefore the actual elevation of the houses fronting Piper Road is not known. Condition 28 says that prior to the construction of groundworks, detailed site plans showing site levels and proposed finished floor levels have to be submitted and approved, again confirming that some of that information is not known at the present time. Therefore, the Parish Council is of the view that prior to the committee approving this application, the work identified in the CK21 report should be undertaken, and any required changes to drawings in the site plan should be submitted for approval. Why this was not done in the 17 months since the application was submitted is a mystery to us. We have detailed technical survey information casting doubt on the JDDK architect's cross-sections. This survey shows that the new dwellings fronting Piper Road will be significantly elevated, and the two-storey dwellings will be significantly higher than the existing houses opposite and to the west. This is why we objected to the layout and requested that only bungalows should front Piper Road on the south side of the site. The officer's report does not address mobility issues regarding access to properties raised above street level. Also, the height of the two-storey houses will be out of keeping with the street scene viewed from the road and footpaths, and we don't agree with the comment in paragraph 747 that heights would be satisfactory under policy GD2. We submit that these matters can only be properly addressed when the actual site and floor levels requested in condition 28 are known. Making this a retrospective condition removes the ability of the committee to properly scrutinise this situation, and on this basis we believe the application should not be approved. Finally, we would ask that careful thought is given to the location and access to the site compound, which is of concern to many residents on Piper Road and Cherryburn Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gray. Now we'll go to Shona Ferguson, the applicant.
Good afternoon. As the applicant, I represent Northumberland Estates and I'm speaking in support of the proposed development at Piper Road, Overingham. The proposed development includes 9 dwellings, of which all are to be provided as affordable housing and would form an extension to the neighbouring affordable housing site. That scheme has been hugely successful, providing homes to 20+ families who might be otherwise forced to live outside the Tyne Valley and outside the area in which they grew up. There are a few key points that are important to consider in the determination of this application, which is recommended for approval within the case officer's report. Firstly, the development addresses the identified affordable housing need within Overingham and the adjoining parishes of Ovington and Horsley. The housing need has been confirmed through a housing needs survey which was completed for Overingham and the surrounding parishes, consultation with local registered providers to establish an evidence demand, and the Northumberland Home Finder data. There has been extensive discussion throughout the determination of the application with the Council's Housing Enabling Officer to ensure the housing mix and tenure directly meets the need of the area, and as a result, the proposed housing mix was amended. As confirmed within the case officer's report, the development now meets the identified affordable housing needs for the local community. This affordable housing would directly contribute to the sustainability of local services and facilities of the village. It is so important to support small-scale developments in rural villages if their services and communities are to be sustained in the long term. Secondly, having examined the possibility of any alternative sites in the area through a sequential analysis and a review of the 2019 Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, there are no other available or suitable sites for the affordable housing provision to be delivered. Importantly, there are also no current alternative sites within Overingham, Horsley or Ovington with planning permission providing any element of affordable housing to satisfy the identified need, and this is confirmed within the officer's report at paragraph 7.29. The proposed development allows for the provision of affordable housing in an acceptable location adjoining an existing affordable housing scheme with no visual harm. If there is a concern that this is greenbelt land, you should be assured that the affordable housing as proposed fully meets the tests and is acceptable within the Greenbelt. Having regard to the objections by the Parish Council on the ground levels and proposed layout, the site has been designed to continue and reflect the form of development of the existing adjoining housing. The layout and scale are also found to be acceptable within the case officer's report, which confirms it would not result in any significant or harmful impacts on existing residents. This is a good quality design, and standards will be every bit as high, if not better, than private housing would be. Similarly, an acceptable drainage strategy and ecological mitigation measures are provided and confirmed through consultation by the lead local flood authority and county ecologist, contrary to the Parish Council's objections raised. In conclusion, the development complies with local and national planning policy and constitutes a rural exception which is appropriate in the Greenbelt. The development would bring no harm but would deliver substantial benefits for local people in need of housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. So we'll now go to members' questions to planning officers. Councillor Waddell.
Thank you. So we see quite a lot of applications that are kind of in the Greenbelt and the issues that come around that. I'm just wondering what exactly are the sort of reasons with this one that's permitted development on the Greenbelt?
Yeah, Chair, just to cover that, you're quite right. There's the government and the council attaches significant importance to the green belt, but as we set out in the report, there are a list of exceptions. So there's quite a closed list of exceptions to inappropriate development. So generally, new buildings in the green belt will be inappropriate unless it meets any of the exceptions that are identified. So in this case, the report highlights that there is the one exception that this could fall under in terms of providing limited affordable housing, and that would also need to be in line with the development plan policy. So on that basis, if we consider that there's an identified need and it's also deemed to be acceptable in terms of other matters such as character, is it well related, is it immediately adjoining an existing settlement, then that could potentially be an exception to inappropriate development in the green belt. So under that exception, we've considered this to be an acceptable site.
Councillor Riddle.
Neil, can you just confirm that there's no other sites available? I think it does make mention to the Schlar in the report, doesn't it? Can you just confirm that there's no other suitable sites available for housing?
Yes, Chair, just it's something we asked the applicants to look at, as in terms of the older Tynedale local plan policy, it does refer to are there any other alternative ways of being able to provide that. So in terms of looking at Ovingdrum itself, the village is quite constrained by Greenbelt, so they did take into account any other potential sites and weren't found to be any that could deliver. We've also considered ourselves just looking at the Schlar and are there any forthcoming allocations for housing, and yeah, so we're satisfied that there aren't any other sites. And I think it's worth also bearing in mind in terms of the wording of the MPPF as well, that there is a slight change in emphasis from the Tynedale local plan policy in terms of having to go through that, looking at alternative sites. That's not necessarily something that's explicitly stated in the MPPF or in emerging planning policy either.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. The local plan says that rural exception sites should comprise less than 10 dwellings, which this development does, but 22 affordable homes have just been built to the immediate west of the application site. So should we be mindful of the combined size of the two developments, or should we focus only on the size of the development in the current application? Also, the local plan hasn't been made yet, and I was wondering whether any made elements of the development plan insist that rural exception sites should be small.
Chair, just on that, yeah, but it is something we've given consideration to, the fact that there is the existing development there recently constructed, and one of the key tests is taking into account the current identified housing need. So in the sense of does it meet the criteria for a rural exception site in terms of a standalone application, then yes, this does. And also we have considered, what the current housing need is, and, we've sought advice from our housing enabler colleagues on that side of things as well. There is obviously concern in objections, and I think the parish touched on it as well, just in terms of potential future development, and we've covered that in the report in terms of that would be subject to a separate application as well in the future, and considered on its merits, and that would have to take into account any identified need, and did it therefore meet the exception to an appropriate development. But in terms of assessing this on its merits, we're satisfied that there is an identified need, and that has taken into account the adjoining development as well.
Council, are you finished, Nick? Yeah.
Could I come back?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Thank you. Could I just ask, were the 22 houses in the previous development, was that classed as a rural exception site at the time?
Yeah, so initially it was 2012, there was an application for 20 houses, and that was dealt with in a similar way. So it was the similar wording in terms of having to satisfy a limited affordable housing need, and that scale was considered to be. I mean, there isn't a set number in terms of what is limited to meet that exception, but that was dealt with and assessed in a similar way, similar policies. Yeah.
Councillor Dale.
Can I, right, whoop, I'm going to go with that. Can I just go back to one of the conditions about the hedgerow? On page 47, number 4, it's just the details about the landscaping. The site plan with the putting in the hedgerow, is that going to be around the actual housing site? Or where's it going to be around?
Chair, on that, there is a removal of a section of hedgerow. I think the site extends in width to around about, it's 46.5 metres along the frontage, and based on the site plan that we have on the screen there, what's indicated is that there would be about 19 metres of hedge retained. So that is along the frontage. On the previous scheme to the west, there had been a hedge, but non-retained at all. So it is something we've sought through this application to retain as much as possible. The landscaping scheme, so that's a condition partly sought as well by the ecologists in terms of the mitigation that they've required. So there is sections to be removed, but there'll be considerably more new hedging around the boundaries of the site is what we would expect. But that would come forward as part of that landscaping condition. We'll liaise with our ecologists on that as well in terms of the mix and whether that's a suitable hedgerow. But yeah, so that's one of the enhancement measures, the mitigation measures, is quite a significant amount of new hedge planting.
Can I just ask on that? I know I've had a lot of rural exception sites which have been built on, and there have been sort of 30, 25 houses, different ones. One of the big things is actually getting the hedgerow correct. So could I ask, and I did actually ask within the one, that we had 3-foot plants put in, and the difference it made has been absolutely fabulous, because the hedge actually is nearly covered. You can't probably see the houses now. So it hasn't taken, it's taken a few years, but actually putting in established hedging rather than just small shrub ones makes an awful lot of difference. So whether that can be considered within the condition, that would be helpful, but it has made a lot of difference. And just the other one, going back to the 106 agreement, in the rural exception sites in my area, we've actually had that section whereby residents who apply, first of all, come or work in the village and all the other criteria that are let down. Will you be using that as well?
Chair, just to come back on that, I'll maybe invite a colleague, Nick Ledbetter, one of our affordable housing officers, can maybe just give you a bit of assurance on the the process for the 106 and
Yes,
how
if I could.
the properties would be delivered.
In regards to the local connection criteria, it's generally put in all of our Section 106s, regardless of whether it's rural exception sites or not. So we have a cascading system within the Section 106, which goes local, next parish, then Northumberland. So that can easily be put in, and it's been put in previous applications from numerous developers. So.
Thank you. I think that's worth clarifying because people know it's actually for local people, first of all, which I think is important. Thank you.
Councillor Sesford.
Thank you very much. Neil, there was mentioned about the finished floor levels and site levels. I'm having a look at condition 28, and it mentions prior to the construction of groundworks, and it mentions about the existing site levels and so on. It shall be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And I think one of the queries here is that why could that not have done earlier on, as in before it came here for this, rather than afterwards, because then we don't get a sight of what the issues are with the floor levels.
Yeah, just on that point, yeah, I mean, the condition 28 is a fairly standard one in terms of whether maybe there's some further information required on levels or it's a slope and site. In this case, there isn't finalised details, although we've been given some indicative levels in terms of what those finished levels are pretty much likely to be. It is dependent on some further drainage works and investigations. So, I mean, what we have taken into account is that whilst that hasn't been definitively given to us as information, given the layout, the relationship with the adjoining properties, the properties opposite and the separation distance, they do far exceed what we would usually ask for in terms of the 25-metre distance between two-storey properties with rear elevation to rear elevation. So there's 3 properties that are 2-storey where there could potentially be a greater impact. 2 of the properties on that frontage are bungalows, so we don't consider that it's going to be significant impact as a result of those. But given the separation and the layout, we are satisfied that there's likely to be acceptable arrangements there, and it would give us that confirmation at that stage as well, before any work started on the properties.
Okay, I gather that, and indicative levels are always what they end up as we found on previous occasions. But if we were to have an issue with the levels prior to this meeting, then we could discuss it now. But if it's afterwards, then they'll be agreed with this committee, and there would be just, I presume, responsibility of the planning officers to make that decision.
Yes, Chair, that would usually be the way to discharge a planning condition. I mean, it will be dependent upon further investigation works with the drainage. I mean, the information would be on public access. It's available for people to view on public access once that discharge of condition application is submitted. But it would be usually an assessment done by officers.
Thank you. And ask one more question, please, which is about that is James at the end, I think, isn't it? Yeah, I thought you were there. James, can you reassure us about the flood risks? I mean, obviously we had this issue with the previous development back in whatever it was, 2012. Can you reassure us that there will not be any issues with this site which is adjacent?
Of course, thank you. Yes, as you allude to, the original sort of phase 1 application was constructed, submitted 2012 and built 2016, and then coincided with a flood alleviation scheme that we constructed at the time. And this consisted of a large ditch and bund to the north of the development, and this conveyed waters away to the east, which eventually go to the Tyne. And this development here sort of makes sure that that ditch and bund will be retained, and the measures which were done as part of that flood alleviation scheme will remain there as part of this phase 2. And there are conditions in there in relation to that. And if I can as well, I'll just add on to some of the issues which were raised just about levels as well with the drainage. So the issue is with regards to a new foul water sewer which is being proposed, and that's taken foul water from the development again off to the east, and that foul water sewer is going underneath a watercourse where there's an existing sewer as well, sort of from the original phase 1, which has taken surface water. So we've got some confidence that a gravity fall system can be done from phase 1 to the east, but those levels just haven't been quite finalised. But because we've got the confidence from phase 1 and those levels, mean we've got the confidence that any land raising on site won't be sufficient, certainly not enough to raise concerns at this stage.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. We've discussed exception sites a lot over the years and the actual housing needs. I noticed one of the comments earlier on was about the housing need and about the data which has been provided. I presume, because all the houses are affordable, obviously if they weren't all affordable, planning permission may be more difficult to obtain. The very fact that these are all affordable housing, are we satisfied, and what means have we gone to obtain the data? Because this has been a problem in the past where a lot of houses have had these affordable concept in, and a lot of people coming into the villages, in fact, haven't been perhaps local people and so forth. I just wonder what sort of data and what analysis has been carried out to define the surveys to identify the local need.
First of all, the applicant did a housing needs assessment which took the general housing need for the area in regards to affordable rented and home ownership products. That in itself identified a need for the area, so Ovingham and the surrounding parishes. What I do as part of my role is we look at council data, so we'll look at Northumberland Home Finder, the applicants on there, and what I did was request data for Ovingham only, and then Ovingham and the surrounding areas, or surrounding parishes, should I say, and that is what started with the change within the tenure and the house types. Northumberland, the applicant, has changed the house types to what I requested to meet the local demand at the point of the obviously evidence being given. Like any evidence, it can change over time. So I could get more evidence today and it could say that there's an increase in housing need. So that we've essentially looked at the home finder data. We've contacted registered providers, RPs, and asked what their information suggests. So Carbon Homes are the main provider within the area and actually have phase 1. So we spoke to them in detail and asked what they thought would work on the site as well, which matched the home finder data. So obviously with that conclusion, what I suggested to Neil was the housing mix which you see today. So it's a mixture of our own data, the housing needs assessment which the applicant did, and intelligence of what from other RPs of what they think could work within the village as well. And so, that's essentially where the conclusion for the houses came from.
So, I mean, I presume when all the other ones were built in 2012, they've all obviously been let now, like think to a local need. But what I'm trying to establish is what methods did the applicants go to give you this housing survey information which you're referring to? What information did they provide? Because we've been here a lot over the years with these sort of questions, and I'm just trying to identify quite what the information is you received.
So the information we received is similar to what The council recently did in Holtwhistle, in Rothbury. We asked for a housing needs survey. So the information which they provided is the same information which we requested when we did our own housing needs surveys for those areas. So they'll have employed a consultancy which specialises in providing the housing needs assessments. So it will have looked at house prices in the area, the income of the residents within the area, upper and lower quartiles, to then assess what people could afford in the area. It would also look at current stock within the area, the tenure types of the stock within the area, and then obviously all that information which their consultancy did would come to a conclusion, which then what we did once we received that within my team is we sat down and looked through it and obviously critiqued it. If we had any issues with it, we went back to them. So we looked at the current commitments within the area, what was going to be built within the SLA, and then it all came back as that there was a residual need for units within the area. Obviously, like you said, there has been other sites within the area which have been exception sites which may have not been approved or not even come to you as an application. So, but this site, the local need was there within the village itself, as well as meeting the demand of the surrounding parishes. So.
Nick Murphy.
Thank you. I'm not totally convinced that this development meets local housing needs. It says on page 37 that the Home Finder data suggests there's a need for 1-bedroom units, but this development doesn't provide those. And above that, it says that over 62 bedroom houses are being built on the Proto Hospital site. And I accept that there might still be a need for 2-bedroom bungalows as opposed to houses. But I'd quite like to know whether those 60 plus 2-bedroom houses on the Proto Hospital site are going to be affordable, because that seems to be something that we should take into consideration when we decide whether this development addresses local housing needs.
In regards to the housing needs survey, Prudder was excluded from it, so we did kind of say that for the purposes of the housing needs survey for Origin, they couldn't take into account the Prudder data. The 2-bedroom units with it on the hospital are affordable rented. They're all affordable rented, and there's also, I think it's 62 3-bed houses for discount market value, so for sale on there at a discount. But even including them within our own kind of evidence, there still was a residual need for the area as a whole. The reason why we've asked for 2-bedroom bungalows and not 1-bedroom bungalows is purely because when they are affordable rent, when you get above a certain age, the universal credit cap under occupation doesn't apply. So essentially anybody over a certain age can move into these units, even if they're on housing benefits or universal credits as it is now, and still get full housing benefit of the full housing element. Also, on the evidence, what we found was that the people who were in a 1-bed need were generally over the age of 55, which meant that they are eligible for a bungalow under our own Home Finder policy, the Common Allocations policy. So that's why we've asked for 2-bedroomed. The other reason is that RPs prefer them, and they find them easy to let, whereas 1-bed units for rented, they generally find quite difficult to let unless they're a single young person or obviously a more elderly person where their partner may have passed away. But you also find that with the more elderly, which these bungalows will be for, they may need support, so living in support and things like that. So without having that bedroom, they can't have the living in support. So that's the reason why we chose 2-bedroom bungalows over 1-bedroom. So.
Any other questions? Councillor Morfitt.
Thank you. Just two quick questions to finish with. The application site is on agricultural land. Is anyone able to tell me what grade of agricultural land it is? And the final question was about the cycle parking. I see that there will be cycle parking provided, which is good. I'm just wondering if anyone can tell me whether it's going to be good, secure, or at least covered cycle parking rather than just a couple of bike stands thrown in as a token gesture.
Chair, just on that, I haven't got the actual grade of the agricultural land within the report, and I don't think it was a material consideration or an issue with the previous application to the west either. In terms of the cycle parking, just double check the condition. What I haven't got shown on the site plan is that, or within the approved plans, is that would actually be sheds stored, that type of structure. So there's no detailed plans of the actual that they are or structures themselves, but just spaces available. You know, there's sufficient space within the plots.
So do we have a proposer for this plan and application? Councillor Stewart? Councillor Dale?
Can I just ask if we can add two conditions on, please, to the proposal? One is about the...
Councillor Dale, if I can just stop you a second, sorry. We need a seconder first, or do you want to be a seconder and ask Councillor Stewart to amend his proposal?
I was going to be a seconder. I'm quite happy to second it and ask Councillor Stewart if he'll agree with my additions. One was just about the 186 agreement and the cascade. Just to make sure that's in writing, because people will understand it and it's good for people to see exactly what it is. And the other one, sorry, was about the about the planting, to ensure we have substantial planting put in. Hedgerow, I had that in added in, as I said, in the one in Stocksfield, and actually it did make a difference. So if I could add that in, so we don't have small whips, we've got quite substantial whips put in. That'll satisfy the residents, hopefully, that the hedge will grow quicker and be quite much more substantial. So that's 04, I think, was that one.
Chair, I missed. I couldn't understand. What's the first one, Councillor Dale?
Sorry?
The first addition you said there? What was
It was about the 106 agreement to secure affordable housing, but actually to the cascading. To show that it's
I think,
for
Councillor Dale, if I can come in from the legal side, dealing with these agreements, as Nick has already said, they are our standard clauses in the 106. So I would suggest that you don't need that as any addition because it's already in the agreement.
Fine, that's I couldn't hear that. Sorry, thank you for that. No, I'm quite happy with that. And the other one is just about the hedgerow and the actual landscaping.
So what exactly, what condition are you wanting amending?
It's on
or an
4,
additional?
okay, on condition number 4. Just to add that there's substantial planting put in, which are, say, 2.5 feet, 3 feet, as against the 1 foot they generally put in. It makes a lot of difference, actually.
Sorry, I think I'm having difficulty with the visor as well.
I'm sorry, I can't take it off because I'm going to lose my...
I know. Can you just repeat it? I don't know if you can maybe move your...
I think we may insist on that one.
Oh, can you?
Councillor Neil suggesting larger, substantial hedging, is 2.5 metres. I think it was mentioned, is that the norm? That's quite large, isn't it?
They generally put in, they can put a foot one, sorry, I'll take this off, but I'll have to get... try. They can, generally they put in 1 foot widths, which actually totally, just most of them get eaten, etc. And they don't last very long, and they don't provide a substantial hedge in the short term. So actually if they put in 2.5 feet, 3 feet widths, they actually make such a lot of difference. And they're quite substantial too. and it provides a much better hedging quicker, and actually, you know, it will respond to actually what the residents want, and I can quite understand it. And it's very minimal cost, but actually it's worth doing.
So absolutely, we could, if members were agreed, you could alter condition 4 to include a detail about a more substantial hedge being planted. But what I would just say is be mindful that it has to be reasonable and necessary in order to make the development acceptable. So if you're telling me that it's not acceptable without it, we can add it, but that's just something.
Add it if you can. Thank you.
Maybe easy for the officers to work with the applicants. Not everybody would
Yes,
like.
there is a condition on there to ask for details, which we will agree with them, and we can certainly ask the question, and if possible, we can ask them for that, but I would probably be reluctant to include it in the condition in case there was some reason it wasn't.
Kate, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
We can certainly include it if that's what members require, but the condition is there for us to agree details with them subsequently. You can certainly ask for that without it being in the condition if that was acceptable.
If I can maybe just add to that as well. I mean, the condition is worded so that it requires the planting schedule to set out species, numbers, densities and locations. I mean, to get a bit more in the mind of the size is to add in the size as well there, rather than maybe set a specific size within that. But we would be looking, as I said earlier, with our ecologists as to whether the mix of plantings appropriate, and also the density, the locations, but the size as well. If we would add maybe it's just that one word into that condition, just so that's included.
Thank you, that
would be reasonable.
So Councillor Daly, you're always suggesting an amendment to condition 4 through Neil, that you would just add, after perhaps setting out species, size, numbers, densities, just adding that one word. Are you agreeable to that, Councillor Stewart? Right. So it's proposed and seconded, so we can move on to debate.
So we can go to a debate now. Councillor Horncastle.
Thank you. There's no problem at all with this application, Princeton Development. Yes, green belt, but it's a rural exception site, 100% affordable housing, backed up with a housing needs survey, so none of that's a problem. But I have got a problem with here is, Neil, could you put the designs back up, please, the plots, whatever they were, 3, 4, 5 and 6 or something. The next one, yeah. Is that the finished design? It is.
Yeah, those are they would be within the list of approved house types. What we haven't got is that's effectively the plan that you would be approving for those 4 plots. But this is the condition about the finished floor levels of those, the finished ground levels. But that is the actual elevation plan. That's the final design.
It's just that, you know, just 2 hours ago I came back from Cramlington with Councillor Stewart, and we were driving along, and we weren't talking about planning, we weren't talking about houses, and all of a sudden, I'll not say where it was, but a couple of miles out of Morpeth, this horror hit us in the face of really, really badly designed housing. Now, when you get something built, you can notice it to begin with, and as the time goes by, it kind of like blends in with the background. What we saw today would never blend in, and that's going to be exactly the same. I mean, you've got in the report that it's similar in character to the recent development. Well, to me, all that's happening here is it got a terrible design to match the terrible design from the previous development. The point I'm making is it's too late to do anything about this now. But in the NPPF, in our new local plan, we talk about good design all the time. And it doesn't, you know, forget it's affordable housing. It doesn't have to put a lot of cost onto a house or a design to make it look something that isn't like that. And I'm just saying in future,
is there any way, I mean, we're doing these design briefs behind the scenes now to, the local plan. Can we not start and insist on something that is a little bit better than that? That's all I'm saying. For the principal development with the site is fine, but design, if that is the finished design, is dreadful.
Councillor Morfitt.
Thank you. I approve of the fact that this proposed development consists of 100% affordable housing and also mostly modestly sized housing. But apart from the provision of cycle parking, I don't see that any efforts being made to contribute towards climate change mitigation. And I appreciate that planning law doesn't yet permit us to insist on solar panels or heat pumps, so these units are going to need to be retrofitted in the next few years at their owner's expense. But might it be possible to condition that each unit has an EV charger, so that if the occupants feel a need to own a car, they'll be more likely to go electric? And is it possible to condition that the cycle parking is either fully secure or at least covered?
Councillor Morfitt, I'm sure Kate O'Neill will come back on whether those conditions could be added or not. But Councillor Stewart and Councillor Dale would also need to agree to those in due course, if that's the case. I mean, it is more for debate, but seeing that you're asking to kind of change the proposal, I think you'll have to answer it.
Yes, so Councillor Morfitt, absolutely it is potentially acceptable to do so. As we've discussed before, we don't have the policies to necessarily backsmith those things up at the moment, but if members wanted to, but again, all I would ask is that you consider whether they're reasonable and necessary to make the development acceptable. If you do wish to do so, we can absolutely add those conditions.
So Councillor Morfitt, it was to add a EV charger to each dwelling, and in respect of the cycle parking, storage for it to be secure and covered.
Yes, yeah. I think I would argue that it's necessary to make this application acceptable, given that the County Council has pledged that the Council will be net zero by 2030. And that this application is making is not attempting to address that challenge to any significant degree. I think that we ought to hold the applicant to account as much as we possibly can on that.
So Councillor Stewart, we'll take each one. Do you want to add, are you happy to amend your proposal to add the condition regarding each dwelling having an EV charger?
Yes, I'm happy with that one. This is the second one.
Right.
So the reason for that is that not everybody will have a bike, and I appreciate what you're saying, Nick, but it could also be a bit of an eyesore. Maybe I'm envisaging something different the way you are, but I would think as it is, the owners of the property may well work with the residents later on to install a covered area there.
So yes to number one, no to number two.
Yes.
And in respect of number one, Councillor Dale, are you happy
Can I just ask you, if we, because I think it's important. Right. It's important, if we're agreeing to add the extra first one, right, is that going to cause a precedent now for every single house application that comes through?
No.
Because I just think we need to be realistic, because there isn't and I agree, but there has to be a policy, I think, within the council. Otherwise, every single housing application now that comes through, it will be expected that has to be the site. And I just wanted to ask you legally where we stand, if it's creating a precedent that at the moment we have no policy for.
So the simple answer is no. Obviously, it wouldn't create a precedent. Each application is looked at on its own merits. If members believe that for this particular scheme it's necessary to warrant the approval, then that's absolutely within your power to do. But it wouldn't necessarily, therefore, be logical to conclude that we would have to insist on it for every housing scheme, because we don't have the policy to back that up.
Yeah, I think that's my main concern. So I'm quite happy with the first one, and if Councillor Stewart doesn't agree with the second one, obviously I'm quite happy, you know, just to agree the proposal. I can't put things there that aren't there. So.
Okay, so the proposal is amended to include an additional condition for each dwelling to have an EV charger. Continue with the debate.
Councillor Riddle.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to be very careful here because we're in danger here, I think, of putting conditions on that can easily be appealed and probably, in my opinion, won't appeal. Because, you know, it's very laudable to want EV chargers, but as Councillor Dale says, don't we have a policy? You know, you've got things that are supposed to be necessary and reasonable. Now, it's not actually necessary to have a charger. It's very desirable, but it's not necessary. And, you know, we're faffing about trying to alter conditions, which actually, you know, the one about the hedging even, that could have been dealt with by officers just in negotiation to plant larger whips. I think we've got to be very careful here, or else, you know, we're going to be in trouble with appeals.
Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Waddell.
Yeah, I think I should probably speak on this as it is in my ward. So, you know, I have to agree with what the officers said about the lack of housing in the area. You know, as a younger person that's grown up in that area, like, it is hard to get a house there. And I am satisfied that the green belt conditions have been met, so thanks to the officers for answering those concerns. The only concern I really still have is the issue around drainage. And so I would really ask the officers to kind of, throughout, if this is approved throughout the process, to be monitoring that and ensuring that the sort of concerns about drainage are taken into account and the flooding issues are mitigated.
So now I'll ask Melanie to explain exactly what we're voting for today on this application.
Yes, Chair, it's that the application be granted permission subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure 100% affordable housing provision on the site, financial contribution to sport and play provision, conditions in the report with the amendment to condition 4 to include size as well as the species numbers, etc. And an additional condition for each unit to have an EV charger at each dwelling. So that is the proposal. Just need to remind Councillors Kennedy and Ferris Aitken that they can't vote in respect of this application because the application had already started before you attended the meeting. But you will be able to partake in the rest of it.
Could I ask a question, please? The condition you put on for EV charger, the way it's put on, it's kind of made it difficult for the committee because, in principle, you know, we agree that everything's right, that this is, you know, a rural exception site. But when you stick the condition, we're not made it. Should we not have decided on the EV situation first to see if the committee were willing to take it on as a condition?
Well, it's not the committee that's willing to take it on. It's whether the proposer and seconder takes it on, not the committee as a whole. That's what you're deciding now, whether you want to vote for this proposal. It's not the whole committee that decides whether to include an additional condition until it comes to the vote. It's just amending the proposal, and the only people involved in that are the proposer and the seconder. So you could technically refuse this and then come back with another proposal. Somebody else would have to propose something and second it, and then we'd go through the process again.
Can I be quite clear? I'm quite happy to withdraw my second. Sorry, I'm having terrible trouble, sorry. I'm quite happy to withdraw my second of that at the present time, to actually ask and discuss the electrical things back again, as you proposed, because I just think that I am concerned because it's not a policy. I would like it. It's not a policy, and I think everybody's feeling rather sort of muddled by it, or and I think that we need to just make a decision about whether we want that to go ahead or not before we actually put my thing is before I actually second that proposal again.
Well, if you it either stays on or it comes off, and essentially that's down to yourself or Councillor Stewart. So Councillor Dale, do you want to withdraw your support for the proposal to have an electric vehicle charger on each dwelling?
I'm quite happy to withdraw it at the present time.
To withdraw it, therefore it's not seconded, so the actual proposal.
Just to interrupt, Neil's made a good point. If members were minded to, and you're uncomfortable with a condition, we could put it as an informative asking that they try and accommodate them.
Absolutely, 100%. Totally agree with that one. Sensible way forward. Thank you.
Right.
I didn't hear a word.
Okay, so the amended proposal again is that you will be voting on is to grant the application subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure 100% affordable housing provision on the site, financial contribution to sport and play provision, the conditions in the report with the one-word amendment to condition 4 to include size. So that's what you will be voting upon.
Can everybody show the hand if they agree with the proposal for this application? So that application has been carried unanimously. Thank you. So I'll go on to the second planning application, which is 2103104 FUL, construction of a first floor rear garden room extension with balcony and external staircase, Saxby House, Station Road, Corbridge, NA455AY. I will ask the planning officer for an update of this application.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me 2 seconds. Click. So members will remember that this application came before the committee in December, where the application was discussed, and members deferred for time for the applicants to try and overcome some of the issues raised in the report. So we have received now some amended plans which I'll run through with you, and that's why we're back here for a decision today. So members will remember, sorry, it's a bit bright in here and you can't see that plan very well. The site is located in the green belt, just beyond the roundabout at Corbridge, on a fairly prominent site. This is the property here, Saxby House, a traditional double-fronted stone property. And we showed you some pictures last time we were here, which we went through in detail, just showing you the extent of existing extensions to the property. So if you remember the rendered part to the right-hand side, the conservatory to the rear, and the two-storey element to the left that you can see in that picture were all previous extensions. So this is actually a photograph showing you on approach from the roundabout as you come over the bridge at Corbridge. You pass a row of houses, and then there's a large field between that and this property, which is what you can see on the left-hand side. And this is just a close-up on the side. At the moment, the property is rendered to the side elevation. So these are just the existing elevations which reflect the photographs that we've just seen and the floor plans. These are the elevations that came before the committee in December. So you can see what was proposed was a large orangey style extension with a flat roof and a lantern light to the side elevation. So it would be, you'd be able to see it from that photograph that we showed you looking across the field. Included a raised patio area and an external staircase. So those are the floor plans there, just showing you where it was. Now, obviously, just to refresh anyone's memory or for anyone that wasn't here, there was significant debate between members both on the two reasons for refusal. The first was whether or not members considered there were very special circumstances put forward, which would mean that the harm outweighed, identified by officers was outweighed. One of the reasons why the applicants have come back with amended plans is to try and show you an alternative layout for how they would use it in the event of a flood. So I'm just going to run those through with you now. That's just some old pictures from the previous application. So you can see now that, I actually can't see that very well myself, that we had some discussions with the applicants about possibly moving the extension to the other side of the property, so that it was away from that very prominent elevation, also to try and address the design issues because we weren't happy with the flat roof design on that really prominent elevation, and also to try and screen the raised patio area a bit better so that it wasn't quite so visible. Obviously, the applicants have gone away and done some consideration, and that's all set out in the report. They've given us a justification as to why you know, the need to retain those other bedrooms that couldn't be converted for living room use. And they've come forward with a proposal that's similar to what we considered in December. But they have indicated on this layout here, you can see the blue lines are showing you where the changes are made. But it means that the room off the new proposed extension could be converted into a kitchen, just so that it can show you a little bit about how it might operate in the event that they get planning permission and in the event that there's then a flood. So these are the elevations that we want to show you. The main changes are that the elevation and the wall below it will all be of stone, whereas you recall from the pictures that that was render at the moment. It's still a large flat roofed extension. They've minimised the roof light in an attempt to try and reduce some of the impact there. And instead of the two large glazed openings that were previously shown, it's now two smaller casement windows. But the balcony remains relatively unchanged. It's still a glass balustrade across the side there. So I'm just going to flick between the two so that you can compare. So this is what was proposed previously, that members discussed and deferred for amendments. Obviously, the most prominent one that you really want to look at is the top right elevation there, which is showing you the elevation that we've been most discussing. And then this is the amended scheme. So it's the very bottom elevation that you would wish to compare it to. So following, oh, I've just completely clicked out of it. Could you go back in? So obviously following the deferral from the previous committee, the officer's recommendation still remains that the application be refused on the basis of the reasons as set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
So we have Paul Williams and Mary Williams here to speak on this application, but you'll have 5 minutes between. Yeah.
Chair, can I just clarify, because I think there wasn't time beforehand, between Paul Williams and Mary Williams, what is the split of time? Is somebody...
Just me.
You're just speaking for the whole 5 minutes? Right, okay, that's fine.
At the November planning meeting, members voted with an overwhelming majority in favour of the fact that there are special circumstances in relation to our situation and the need for us to make our house more resilient to flooding by providing ourselves with some upstairs space to live so that we're not displaced as we have been in the last 2 floods. Unfortunately, the officers are still recommending refusal. After the meeting, we tried to arrange a site meeting with them so we could discuss it on site. They were unwilling to meet with us. This is a shame because we would have liked to have explained why we want the extension where it is and why it's very difficult to accommodate it elsewhere. The committee report before you, paragraph 7.14 says, and I quote, "The applicants state they would not consider an alternative location for the extension." This is simply not true. We have considered the planner's suggestion it would be better accommodated at the other side of the house, less visible from the approach. As long as there are no windows, it wouldn't have overlooking problems. It would have been easier to explain why this wouldn't work if we could have had them on site. We sent photographs to show the impact on our neighbours if we were to follow their suggestion. We also sent that to you yesterday by email. The photograph shows if we were to build at the other side, we'd look directly into our neighbours' kitchen windows, and it would be a gross violation of their privacy. We've spoken to them. They say they would seriously object, and we've consulted with them on this proposal, which they have no objection to, and neither have the parish council. With regard to the design, we did send 2 different designs, but unfortunately they don't like either. So we submitted the one, traditional stone extension, which matches the existing character of the house. It's got 2 Victorian sash windows instead of a conservatory style extension, and it ties in with the front of the property to match the rest of the house, reflecting its existing character. We'd be happy to accept conditions which ensure one-way glass and would fit blinds so that light pollution is not a problem. However, on submitting the revised plans, we had an email from Kate Blythe which says, if you do propose to make amendments along the lines you suggest, I would suggest from the comments made at the committee that members want to see no openings on the end elevation. So we think that says you can build there as long as there's no openings there. And they're not saying that we can't propose it, they're saying propose it without openings. So we commissioned a design without windows. It looked ugly, closed in, it looked like a prison or a shipping container. It's not a good design, not at all attractive, dreadful. We ask you to remember why we're asking for this extension. We want to live in it when we're flooding. Flooding has a profound effect on mental health. There's a massive increase in anxiety, and I'm not ashamed to say it caused me clinical depression. Many neighbours suffered from similar despair and misery. After the second catastrophic flood in 2015, 30% of our community suffered PTSD. After each flood, it's taken us a year to reinstate our house. So given past experience, we would be living in this extension for a year at a time. The back of our house faces east. We lose the sun at midday. An extension on this gable with no windows would be very dark, especially in winter when light is limited. Hence, we would be traumatised, anxious and depressed, living in a semi-box. Daylight in housing has been shown to play a large part in overall attitude, satisfaction and well-being of occupants. We do not understand why we are not allowed windows, especially when the mirror house across the field, like us, on the border, has an extension with 2 windows. Finally, we've sent floor plans showing how the internal layout would work. It brings our scheme in lines for approving the development of our neighbour's house, where the whole house was raised above ground to protect the occupants from flooding, massively increasing mass and scale. What we're doing is the same in that we're adjusting our house to allow ourselves enough room to remain living on the first floor. The plans we've circulated show how we'll be able to put a temporary kitchen into what was a former bathroom with all the plumbing provision we need. Building where we propose means very little trouble for us to make the small changes necessary to remain living in the house, a small extension, a bit of outdoor space and an access. We don't know what else we can come up with that is going to be accepted, and we feel we're not going to get office support on this application. Given that you've already voted and agreed that there are special circumstances, we ask you to support it.
Thank you, Mrs Williams. Now go to members' questions to planning officers. Councillor Hutchinson.
The first one that springs to mind is why couldn't you go out for a site meeting?
Thank you. Yes, officers have already visited the site before and are very familiar with it, and there wasn't any need to go back out on site, and obviously all the information that we have in front of us is sufficient.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yes. Obviously, the applicants asked us to go out to discuss the application with them, but it wasn't necessary. The officers have already visited the site and are well aware of the circumstances. We were happy to meet with them via Teams, but I didn't think it was necessary to go out back on site.
Councillor Sexford.
Yeah, thank you very much. A lot of this seems to come down to windows on the gable end that looks over the field. Now, there's been a comment about that room would be in darkness. I'm at to, just to make sure I've got this right, there's windows on both sides. There's windows on the gable end, and there's which is the north elevation, I think. Was it? I think it's north. But there's also windows on the south elevation. Were you wanting both of them removed, or just the ones on the gable end side? I just want to check that first.
And so the windows that we were referencing were on that prominent elevation, which is shown at the very bottom of the photograph there, not the ones at the rear of the extension. But just to clarify, officers weren't saying we would support the application if there was no windows there. We just said that that might help members to come to a different decision, because one of the issues raised was obviously the impact of that prominent elevation and being able to look out and into that property.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. So in actual that room, there's windows to the east elevation, windows to the south elevation. I mean, even if we went with that, there are no windows on the north elevation. However, I do agree that there is quite a difference there between this plan and the last plan. One question I would like to ask, though, is it's been stated that across the field there is an extension, on another house which have windows overlooking the field, obviously going in the opposite direction, of course. So I think, what is the difference between one house and the other house? I mean, obviously I know one you can see going one direction in your car, but you can still see the other going in the other direction. So
yeah, thank you. I'm not familiar with that property, so I really wouldn't want to either talk about what it looks like or what we looked at when we looked at the application, because I don't have the details in front of me. Obviously, it's just been raised today. But all that we would say is we're looking at this application in front of us and we'll have to discover whether or not we're happy with the impact of those windows. But I wouldn't be able to comment on the previous application.
okay, well sticking with those windows, and nothing to do with the massing and all that, the size, sorry. What is the actual problem with those windows, apart from you can see them driving up the road? I mean, if you ignore the other things, because that's another deal, I'm just talking about these windows. What is the actual issue with having windows, especially if it's one-way glass, which I believe the applicant said?
So just to be clear, obviously the officer's recommendation isn't that the windows are the issue with the application. It is the form, scale, massing of the extension, which the officer's recommendation is.
Sorry, I'm just taking it bit by bit. I'm just doing
Yeah,
one
no,
bit
that's
at a time.
absolutely fine. I just want to sort of explain that obviously the applicants then came to us and said that they had a couple of suggestions for what they could do. We had suggested that out of the two options they proposed to us, the smaller, more traditional windows would probably be better in this more traditional property. What we discussed at the committee last time was obviously, and actually the applicant has addressed it somewhat there, was that obviously in terms of light in the evenings and those kind of things, it would make the extension more prominent to have very large, which is what was proposed earlier, openings on that elevation, which would make it quite intrusive. Seeing people inside and the lights being on in the evening would make it more prominent than having no windows there at all. But just to clarify, officers aren't saying that the windows are the main issue here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dale.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Sorry. I wasn't here at the last meeting when this was discussed, so I'm looking at it as a brand new application. I haven't heard all the arguments before or anything against. There's just one or two things which are really going back to the last application. The special circumstances in the green belt. And this special circumstances is according to about flooding. And also, I know the parish council have also said in their response, adaptation of existing houses vulnerable to flooding at the standards is very sensible, sorry, not my glasses, sensible. So I'm just asking, because I don't know, I wasn't part of the conversation that took place, but it's about special circumstances and legal position as far as special circumstances is concerned. And also, as I said, the parish council is stating that there's special circumstances for all the existing houses in the Stanners. So can I just ask you about how this policy lies further from special circumstances for this house? What are the other special circumstances which could relate to the rest of the houses in that area? I have got flooding in my area where they could have special circumstances too. Houses totally flooded out and it took them 1.5 years, 2 years to get back in, etc. So are we actually saying that flooding now is becoming a special circumstance so people can build big houses and live upstairs? Because I just think we need to be clear about what we're actually agreeing here, because I actually think that we have to be consistent in our approach all the way through, and that is a concern that I just want to know this council's reading of what special circumstances are according to flooding. I know it might sound a bit of a legality thing, but I do think it's important.
No, that's fine. Hopefully I'll try and address everything that you said there. But just to clarify, obviously, the application came before the committee in December. There was significant discussion about whether or not there were very special circumstances. Members obviously didn't make a decision on the application, it was deferred. So members do have to take a fresh decision tonight as to what they want to do with the application. But obviously I'm aware that there were some members that weren't here at that last committee, so I'll just give a bit of a recap on what we discussed. So obviously the officers have put forward that the property has been significantly extended. We couldn't class this as a limited extension in the Greenbelt, and therefore the development would be inappropriate. We have a second reason for refusal, which is to do with design. When the discussion occurred in December, there was quite a significant discussion about whether or not it could warrant very special circumstances. And the answer is anything can warrant very special circumstances if you consider that the information that comes to you is sufficient to outweigh any harm identified to the Greenbelt. So when there was some discussion, obviously there was no vote taken on the actual recommendation. However, members did seem to be saying that they could view this, if they were happy with everything else, that there would be some very special circumstances. It doesn't set a precedent for other development because each application has to be looked at on its merits, but it certainly could be something that you could consider to be very special circumstances if members wish to do so. Obviously, the recommendation of officers is that we don't think that the issues put forward warrant enough very special circumstances to outweigh the harm we've identified, but members may take a different view and are perfectly entitled to do so.
Keep on going off and on. Sorry, there's 3 different aspects of the refusal, and this one is one of them. Thank you. It's all right. Thank you.
So do we have a proposer for this application? Nobody had the hands up. No more questions. So do I have a proposer for this application? Yeah. Councillor Horncastle?
I would like to propose that we approve the application on the back of the discussion we had in this room a couple of months ago, where what's been said by the planning officer is not really the way I remember it. The committee at the time would never have wanted this to come back if they didn't think there were special circumstances in this. We discussed the special circumstances at length on that day, and I can't understand why the plan officer is suggesting we have an extension with no windows, which is ridiculous, or an extension overlooking somebody's garden, which the neighbours would never ever build, because a good neighbour would not build something to overlook. So I'll say something else at the end, but I actually propose that we approve the application.
Can I just step in there a second? You said that you want to grant the application. Obviously, there are no conditions, etc., on this report. So, would you want to defer it for the officers to go away and formulate conditions and then come back to committee, or do you want to propose to grant it with conditions to be delegated to the Director of Planning in conjunction with the Chair?
If it got granted approval, the third option is my, to delegate it behind the scenes would be my preferred option.
Right, so that would be grant the application with necessary conditions to be formulated by the Director of Planning and agreed by the Chair, essentially. You will need to give reasons, given that you're relying on very special circumstances in the green belt, but I'll hand over to Kate to talk to you a bit more about that.
So obviously following the discussion that we had last time and being aware that some members obviously weren't here at that committee, I'll give you what I think is the recap of what you think the circumstances are, if you just want to agree or disagree with me. So you're suggesting that the very special circumstances set forward by the applicant in terms of the impact to them from earlier flooding and to enable them to be able to live in the property going forward is a very special circumstance, and you're satisfied that that outweighs all the harm identified to the greenbelt? Okay.
Councillor Riddle will second that.
I would like to second that proposal of Councillor Horncastle.
So now we can go to a debate.
Can I just say I don't think I can take part in this any longer. I wasn't here for the first discussion that you've all decided on prior to this, so I can't be part of that conversation. I don't know what took place because I didn't hear, so I'm sorry. I'm just going to release myself from this planning application.
Councillor Dale, I was just going to say, you don't have to have been here at the last time. Obviously, it would have been useful if you had for that information. I know people are referring to past information, yes, but you've got the report and you've heard the officer's report and the questions and had a chance to ask questions. So it's entirely up to you whether you want to partake in this. You can abstain if you want to when it comes to the vote.
I'll just abstain then, because as I said, I wasn't here for the first, when all the discussion took place. And therefore, Councillor Horncastle is referring to the discussion that took place based on that. And I wasn't here, so I can't really make any decision.
Right. Well, that's entirely a matter for you, but you can take part if you want to. But we'll leave it until the vote.
Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you. I just don't see this at all. I mean, what's being proposed here is supposedly a living space for resilience during a flood. Now, if there was a flood, what resilient space would I want on that floor? Surely I'd want a kitchen, like a washing machine, etc. But what we're being presented here with is a garden room. I'm really struggling to see what a garden room what resilience a garden room would give you with a nice balcony and a very substantial house. And I'm struggling to see what resilience a garden room with a balcony is going to give you. And I really question some of the motives towards this, to be honest. I thought that last time. I really haven't changed my mind on it. You're looking at page 66 in the reasons where it says that, the refusal is due to virtue of size. Well, it is substantial. Scale and massing, together with extension to the property, result in disproportionate cumulative addition. I mean, look at the size of that house. Substantial. That extension is substantial. And it's saying that they outweigh the harm to the green belt. So I'm not sure what's going on here, because it seems fairly straightforward to me. If somebody was saying here that they were putting resilience in there, and it's got kitchen, waterworks, bathroom, washing machines, all sorts of stuff, I kind of would get it. But I ain't seeing that. I see this as a room that somebody wants, that it's a place of relaxation, and that's what they wanted, and that's what they wanted previously. So for those who aren't taking part in this, it was a glassed room. It was an orangery, not a resilient room for flooding. And I really don't see an awful lot that has changed on this, other than, they put stonework in instead of glass for part of it. But it doesn't change one iota of what this room is. This room is a relaxation room where somebody was sitting there for an orangery, and then you have a platform to overlook land. And I struggle to see the arguments which is saying that this is a resilience room. I just cannot see it, because if it was, there would be lots and lots of services in that, and I'll leave that is my view on this, and I will be voting against the proposal by Councillor Horncastle, which is to support this. I will be voting against that.
Councillor Riddle.
Yeah, in counter to that, I would suggest that, if you had actually been flooded, you would appreciate why this is needed. And, yes, there is still a glass room upstairs, but, if you've lost your living room downstairs, why shouldn't you have a living room again? And, it does show a new kitchen. It does show how things can be changed. And I believe that this is perfectly reasonable. In actual fact, if you think what the protection of Greenbelt is supposed to be about, one of the main purposes is to stop sprawling development of properties and villages merging into each other, etc. In my opinion, this doesn't harm the Greenbelt in any significant way, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable adaptation.
Councillor Sesford.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I can understand how things are interpreted one way and things are interpreted other ways. And it was a very difficult decision to when we were doing it last time, a couple of months ago. However, in my ward, I had quite a few houses flooded. I had one person, I think, was out 16 months. And I spoke to him on several occasions. I know exactly what Mr. and Mrs. Williams are on about. Yes, they will have extra room, and one hopes that one will never need to adapt upstairs with the kitchen, which is shown on one of the pages, proposed floor plans, and the extra things upstairs. However, I have to think of what they've been through twice and think of how genuine they've been, and if the wool's pulled over my eyes, then the wool's pulled over my eyes, because I do think that, that's their house. They love the place. They don't want to move. And speaking to someone actually today, because I went and had a chat with them today about the effects, a Corbridge person by the of the flooding, And, you know, the water does actually go down relatively quickly. I think their house was flooded reasonably badly, and they left and they were out 5-6 months, and that was the shortest one in the village from what I gather. Most people were a year and a bit, and they would have, if they'd been able, because obviously you've got to be able to do these extensions, have loved the opportunity to live in their house, albeit slightly cramped and not as they were used to, while they managed to get the rest of the house sorted, rather than commuting back and forwards for, in this case, 6 months, but in the case of one of my families in Hexham, 16 months. So, so then I looked at the differences between 2 months ago and this time. And is there a lot of change? There's not a lot, but there is a bit of change, and I do like the smaller windows better than the large window that was there before. I'm not going to lose any sleep over the fact that they still have that glass, at least I think it's glass, and that's what I assume it is, glass wall on the balcony that they've got, or covered area, should I say. So weighing everything up, I think I'm coming down in favour of Councillor Horncastle's proposal, which is to accept this application.
Anybody else? Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, I mean, I sympathise entirely with the applicant and the application. The question I'm thinking to myself all the time here is that obviously, you know, we all have had people who have been flooded. I mean, you know, and my area is no different than anybody else's. I'm just wondering if there's a precedent going forward to these type of applications coming in, and if we're now accepting the provision of exceptional circumstances. In other words, if any other application comes in now throughout Tynedale, and, you know, obviously climate change and floods is an everyday part of life these days, are we therefore creating some sort of precedence now for this sort of application coming in the future? I'm not making any comment about the present application, because anybody who suffered flood damage, you know, is obviously, as Councillor Sesford said, is a major traumatic period for them. But I'm asking if we give permission for this tonight, is this creating a precedence for future applications like this and the term exceptional circumstances? And I would like a reply.
So I think we addressed this a little bit earlier, Councillor Sharp, when Councillor Dale posed the question about very special circumstances. So what we would say is anything can be a very special circumstance. What I would say is that it has to be individual to that particular application and the set of circumstances that you consider are appropriate, and members are entirely okay to go ahead and say that you consider that they are in this circumstance. That's absolutely fine. Going forward, obviously, you wouldn't be able to mirror an exact same application going forward. It may be that in another site we did consider that flooding was enough of a very special circumstance to outweigh the harm we've identified. So there's no precedent set, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't use it again.
I think ultimately, you know, you've heard from the officers that they don't feel that it's a very special circumstance. There's case law to say that it can't just be a special circumstance, it has to be a very special circumstance. There's all sorts of case law on this, and ultimately it would be for the courts to decide if it was ever challenged. Like I say, there's lots of different cases on where judges have said, yes, this is a very special circumstance, and no, this isn't.
Councillor Fairless-Aiken, would you like this?
Thank you. Yes. I also wasn't here at the hearing in December, but I was witness to Storm Desmond, as I'm sure a lot of us were. I drove past, in fact, that particular spot as it was happening, and Corbridge was turned into a huge estuary rather than river, and I was horrified And I have to admit, when I first looked through the application, I was of mind of Councillor Kennedy. But hearing your eloquent speech about your circumstances, I don't believe this is going to open floodgates, no pun intended. But I think it's a very creative solution, and it's a very sort of European way of thinking, and quite a Dutch way of thinking, of elevating and taking your space upwards and potentially future-proofing your home. And I think that's incredibly important. So yes, I'm going with Councillor Horncastle on this one.
Does anybody else want to speak on this application before we go to a vote? Yes, Councillor Hall.
Thank you. Right, well, first of all, I'd like to say, well done, Councillor Kennedy. A very clever speech, but it's not up to the committee to second guess. Where are you? You're there. You're not up to the committee to second guess what the applicant's doing. You're here to look at what's in front of you. And what's in front of us is something different to what was in front of us 2 months ago, which, to my mind, the principle of doing it was all right, but the design certainly wasn't. It was just plucked out of a brochure. This is actually a proper design that fits the house. So there's also, the committee should really know that there is a massive disagreement here with the between applicants and the planning officers over the actual scale and mass, and they can't come to any agreement on the actual how much of increase there actually is. Councillor Dale worried about, you know, the effect that this will have on other applications. It's been explained to us, everyone's taken on its merits. But what I will say is that in this part of, well, this part of Corbridge, this will not be the last application you see coming in. Because, and I hate to say this, but this is all down to the neglect of the Environment Agency, who actually refused to take away the reason for the flooding in Corbridge, building up the banks with little berms and the bottom of the river building up with silt. What happens is it floods over and then they build up a bit more. So if 100% sure, it will be flooded again. So a house not far away from here, 3 or 4 years ago approximately, was put up on stilts to avoid the problem. Not all houses, house designs can actually, lay themselves to that. So there is special circumstances here that this house is going to get flooded again. If it's flooded again, the bottom floor will be gone, and this room, whatever it is actual more living space. And it's up to the applicant, if it's going to be of any use to them, to put facilities upstairs. So thinking back to the discussion that the committee had 2 months ago, it's a pity Councillor Oliver isn't here because he is a local member. I honestly think that the harm to this, if you look at it, we're talking about the green belt here, you know, there's not extensions, houses built in the garden. The harm will not outweigh approval of this application.
So I'll ask Melanie to confirm what we're voting for today.
Okay, it's to grant the application with conditions to be imposed, with those conditions to be delegated to the Director of Planning to decide in conjunction with the Chair, and the Director of Planning to determine the wording of those conditions as well.
So can I have a show of hands if you're in favour of this application with the recommendations?
Seven. Against.
And against.
Four against. Any abstentions?
4 against. Any
abstentions?
Abstentions. Councillor Dale.
So that's carried.
So that's carried, yeah.
So we've just got planning fields update.
So just go to agenda item 8, planning appeals update, and this is just for information. Councillor Dale?
Can I do it? We'll actually say it's okay. Sorry, on page 74. enforcement appeals received. Could you just tell me if those are still appeal start date 1st of February 2021?
Appeals update and enforcement. Sorry, Chair. Councillor Dale, what was the question you've mentioned? Page 74. What?
Yes, there's two planning applications at Whittenstall, or enforcement received at Whittenstall.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to have there was an outcome to those. Because the appeal start date was February 21.
Yeah, so these are appeal start dates, so they've just begun on the 1st of February, so there won't be a decision for some time, I wouldn't expect.
Sorry, it says its appeal start date was February 2021.
Yeah, there would be a decision there if it was recent enforcement decision. That is correct, I am in the wrong year, apologies. I don't know if there is a decision. I would have thought it would be on the appeals update if there was.
Sorry?
I would have thought the decision would be on the appeals update if there was one, but I can find that out and let you know.
Could you do, because I think it's a legal matter? Thank you.
And I'll hand over to Trevor for agenda item 10.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scott. Right, we're going to have ourselves a slight break now because the planning officers are going to leave us. Well, if they want to, of course, they can always stop and and we'll be coming back. What time is it now? Right, we're coming back at 5 to 6 and we will start at 5 to 6, whether you're here or not. Thank you. Can we stop the live feed, please? Please. Yep, thank you very much. Welcome back to the Tynedale Local Area Council. We're going to go back to the agenda and we're up to item number 9 now, which is the Local Transport Plan Programme for 2022-2023. And here to present this will be Paul Jones, Neil Snowden and Andy Craig. Over to whoever's going to start.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that you have before you just sets out the draft Local Transport Plan Programme for 22-23 financial year. And it's for your consideration and feedback prior to that report and that programme activity being finalised in February, or later on in February. So we have a few things to note. We have yet to get final confirmation from the Department of Transport as to what the allocation is for the next financial year. We have based the programme on a £23.5 million capital allocation, which is basically what we received last year. And informally, DFT officials have indicated that that's kind of like the ballpark that we'd expect to get as well. So hopefully that will be the case. If we get a bit more, all well and good. The programme is split across 4 key areas. So you'll see from the report it covers cycling and walking, it covers safety schemes, road maintenance, and then bridges, structures and landslips. And that's been basically drawn up following a review of the maintenance needs of the highways asset. And that's looking at identified road safety issues as well, potential improvements to the highway and transport network, including the numerous priorities put forward by both county councillors and town and parish councils that have all been considered as part of that process. So the draft programme set out in the details of that in appendices to the report, in appendices A to D. And in summary, this includes just over £1.3 million for walking and cycling activities and improvements, £2.1 million for safety improvements, approximately £15.3 million for road maintenance activity, and £4.7 million for bridges and structures and landslips. So there are some key points that I would like to highlight within the report. In terms of the cycling and walking section, the allocations on that area are split between improvements to things such as crossings, footways, bus stop waiting areas, and then the other aspect of that is maintenance. So it's maintenance of footways and cycleways, as well as maintenance to the rights of way network, which I'm sure you'll appreciate has taken a bit of a beating of late as well. The LTP allocations obviously aren't the whole story in terms of cycling and walking in the county. So you will note from the county council's papers that are coming forward for the full council budget in February for consideration. Also include a proposed £1.5 million within the capital programme there for development and delivery of cycling and walking schemes, and that's part of the council's continuing initiative to look at the cycling and walking investment activity, including the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, or LCWIPs as they're referred to, that cover the Northumberland main towns. And it's expected there'll be consultation on those LCWIP documents and proposals coming out soon. We'd also like members to note that clearly there have been a number of priorities that have been put forward by both county councillors and from town and parish councils for the introduction of new cycleways and footways. And unfortunately, some of those were beyond the funding that was available through the LTP programme. But these have been captured separately. They have been recorded and they will be considered in future should sources of funding become available to support that activity. In terms of the safety proposals in the programme, obviously the majority of the integrated transport improvement funding is concentrated on safety, and this includes programmes to improve road safety at high-risk sites where there's been patterns of accidents and injuries over the past 3 years, as well as other areas both within the rural and urban roads where there's been safety concerns identified from a number of sources. We also include within that safety programme things such as traffic management activity more generally, as well as speed reduction schemes. And as part of that, you'll note that there is a £500,000 allocation that's there to enable the full completion of the 20 miles per hour programme for schools. And to date, just for some scores on the doors, there's 107 schemes implemented to date against the 161 schools where those schemes are considered possible. There's a further 10 schemes that are issued for construction and a further 44 in design, and it's those 44 in design and some of the ones in construction that won't get completed this year that will be taken forward into the next year for that funding. So we're also proposing a £350,000 allocation for refurbishment and renewal of existing signs and replenishment of lines on the highway. This is an area that we receive a lot of concerns from both town and parish councils as well as local members. So there's additional funding there to try and address some of those concerns and get on top of some of those issues. On the roads maintenance side, the roads programme is wide-ranging. It entails maintenance schemes across the county as a whole. It includes activities such as resurfacing and structural patching, a significant surface dressing programme over the summer months, and microsurfacing schemes that are predominantly undertaken in the more urban areas. It also includes allocations for capital repairs to carriageways, structures, drainage, car parks and traffic signals. And the programme has been developed using the transport asset management principles and based on officer's knowledge and condition of the highway asset. In addition to the LTP programme, it's also worthwhile highlighting that there is a further £2 million allocation proposed within the Council's capital programme for the next financial year, specifically for investment in UNC roads and footways. And this follows on from the £15 million that's been allocated to that activity over the past 2 financial years. So it's building on that additional investment as well. The final element of the programme relates to the Bridges, Structures and Landslips programme. And within that, this primarily looks at strengthening under-strength bridges from bridge assessments. This includes some works to the historic Grade 1 listed structure in Berwick, which is an ongoing programme of activity. But within the Tynedale area, there are 3 bridge schemes in the Tynedale area included, one on the C279 at Blue Gables, one on the C205 at Middleton, or Middleburn rather, and one on the U8177 at Garden House. There's also 2 landslip schemes in the Tynedale area on the programme, which is the U5034 at Blindburn and some further works at the 686, A686 north of Light Berks. What I have to say though is the majority of the landslip programme is focused over the next 2 years on the major issue that we have at Todsteads, which isn't in the Tynedale area, but it is part of our resilient road network. And this is on the B6344 Weldon to Rothbury, or Weldon Bridge to Rothbury Road. The Todstead scheme is a major one. It's a £9.3 million investment that will span over 2 financial years. So next year it's just over £4.6 million, of which there's been £1.863 million allocated from the LTP, together with a further £2.795 million from County Council capital funding. So that's a significant investment to address that long-standing problem there. It's a really complex and difficult problem in terms of the geology of the valley. There's artesian water pressures as part of that. So it's a very complex scheme, both in terms of just actual land stability and also the environment that the teams are going to have to be working in to resolve that, where there's lots of nature conservation issues and it's at close proximity to the River Corkert. So we'll be on that for the next 2 years, but that's a quick overview of the programme that we're proposing, and more than happy to take any comments or questions that you have regarding that. I've got the 2 officers that have been involved in the development of the programme here to help with that activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Comprehensive as ever. I'm going to go to questions in just a second. Just to remind members, of course, these chaps are available all the time. You know, you can contact them anytime. You don't have to wait for local area council meetings to get in touch, especially when we've got something like a presentation tonight, because everybody will want to speak about them tonight. So use the other 365 days of the year as well. Okay, right then, let's see some hands, or not, as the case may be. Councillor Morford.
Thank you, Paul. I think you've more or less answered the question I was planning to ask, but I'd still like a bit of clarification if I could. £222,000 is going to be allocated for improvements to walking and cycling infrastructure, and I was disappointed at that amount. But as you've just said, and as I read, there's a separate dedicated capital funding allocation of 1.5 million committed to the development of the delivery of walking and cycling schemes. And I was just wondering if you could confirm, is that 1.5 million entirely outside of the LTP programme? And is it, yeah, and in addition to the 1.302 million that's been allocated within the LTP programme?
Yes to both questions.
Thank you.
If it's approved at the budget.
if it's approved at the budget, there's a proposed allocation, subject to full council approval.
Thank you.
Councillor Deal.
Thank you very much. Just to go on to what Councillor Morpeth was mentioning about the cycle, 1.5 cycle, you were saying it was for main towns. So, you know, I have my views. I started cycling walking board and Sunderland cycling walking board quite a long time ago, and it's such an important issue. That was in 2014. And I just think that we need to have a proper infrastructure in place for cycling across the county and actually grow it. It's like, a bit like the A1 and have springs off. And we have got one in various areas, but I would like to see more of that. And I'm sure Councillor Morpeth would like to see that. Can I just add on about the various concerns I do have, and they are long-standing. And that's the maintenance of signs and lines. And this is ongoing. 350,000 doesn't go very far. The problem I have is that we all spend a lot of money on out of our members' allowance, and we give you, various projects to take forward, and whether they're 20-mile-an-hour schemes or whatever. But the lines just disappear within a short time. And it's this progress of actually spending money. The speed signs disappear. They run very quickly. You're talking about a year and a half, 2 years. I've got some of mine have disappeared already. And it's ongoing. And the cost of them, is quite substantial. So if we are going to spend our money out of the schemes, we need to know that actually those lines are going to be kept up to date all the time. And it's an expensive ask, and I do understand that. So I would like to see that maintenance of signs and lines. I've actually got real problems in my area with speeding of lines and actually bad accidents. So I just think you need to understand that that is so important. So that's one thing. So I would like to have seen some more money in that, please. Secondly, go on to page 92, which has got this various rural road safety issues. Various safety issues, £175,000. I don't think that's enough again. I think some of the real issues we have will be a lot more. And I think, Councillor Ridley, are you the portfolio holder? Well, I think if you can come to my area and I'll show you where all the bad accidents have appeared, plus more. It's not a smiling thing, I'm sorry, because actually people have died. So what I need to know is that you're going to have enough money in there to actually action things straight away. And I'm not sure 175,000 will be enough. So could you take that back and consider it further, please?
Of course we'll consider these things, Councillor Dale, but the reality is that it's a limited pot, and the LTP programme that has been put forward by officers. I have not interfered in it in any way whatsoever. There's been no favouritism to anyone, and the fact that in the budget proposals we're putting an extra proposal of £1.5 million into cycling. You've got the LC whips and the levelling up fund. The idea is to have things that are oven ready, and we can, dive into any money that becomes available. There's also a proposal for an allocation of an extra £2.25 million, I think, for UC roads and footways in the budget for this next budget meeting, if it gets approved.
Can I just go back, please, Mr. Chair? Just to say, I wasn't saying that you gave any preferential treatment at all. I wouldn't think you would do at all. I never said that. What I was saying is that there's not enough in the budget.
Okay, that's understood. Headings. Thank you, that's understood. I mean, at the end of the day, there isn't anybody who I mean, if it trebled and quadrupled and multiplied by 20, we'd still spend the money. If the members would still be able to spend the money. But it's not there, so it's a difficult job. And if there was any favouritism, I haven't had any.
Well, I haven't either. Certainly, I wasn't taking, and I never said there was.
Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. So the Hexham Town Council put forward as one of its major schemes was a request for 20 mile an hour, for the town to become a 20 mile an hour town. We did write to Rob Murphy about that, and he said he would look into it. But I don't see that featured in any of this. I'm just very concerned that Hexham has several parts of the town which are 20. Example around the high school, in the town centre, and various other parts of the town. And then you've got other bits which are 30. You know, the Tyne Green's just been made 20 as well. So you've got this like competition of 20 and 30 mile an hour around the town. Now the town council agreed that it would like that will have a uniform 20 mile an hour, so it makes it very simple for all users that when you arrive into Hexham and you traverse around Hexham, that you have 20 mile an hour, and that we don't have this 20-30 business going on. And you know, and I think there's loads of advantages to that, notwithstanding the safety aspect, but you could also start to reduce the clutter that we have of like signs saying 20-30 all over the place, and you know, so there's loads of advantages to it. There is a groundswell of public opinion in Hexham that they would like to see this as well. And I just wonder how we go about getting this into the programme. I mean, I don't see it as being hugely costly, because there's not a lot of infrastructure to put in. It's just really making what is a dual standard that you have of 20s and 30 just into a single standard of 20. So I was just wondering, how can we go about, even if it doesn't go into this year, because it might need some thought and some detailed understanding, but how do we go about getting this on the agenda as for consideration? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is something that we are looking at, but I think that there are concerns from a road safety perspective to look at a blanket approach across a whole area, because whilst you may put 20 miles an hour signs, it has to be kind of commensurate with the road conditions as well. And if it isn't, what you have is people that will just effectively ignore that unless there's some engineering solutions to actually reduce the speed of traffic. So it's not just a case of putting signs in for all roads. It has to be much more nuanced than that to be effective. So it is something that we are looking at the principle. It's not in the programme as yet because we haven't come to a conclusion in terms of is that something that's a viable proposition for the whole of the Hexham town in itself.
Can I just come back?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you. Well, that's good to hear. So I'm very pleased to hear that. I mean, I would be, I'll be happy to be party to that conversation. I'm sure that the other councillors in the town would also. Just to see what we can do, because we do know there's other towns, not Northumberland, of course, but there is other towns in the UK who've actually adopted this approach so many years ago. So it's not as if we're unique here, but certainly if you wanted to pilot this type of scheme in Northumberland, Hexham will be happy to put its hand up and say, we would like to do this. That is that support from the town council, and that is a general groundswell of opinion in the town.
Thank you. Are there any chances of a pilot scheme being tested anywhere?
I think we would want to finish the work that we're doing to actually look at the viability of it first, and to come back with yourselves with the view from officers in relation to that and have that discussion, and then take that forward from there. I think the key thing is we have We have had experience previously of putting 20-mile-an-hour schemes in parts of Northumberland that fundamentally have actually made the road conditions and safety worse if they weren't done within the right area with those additional control measures to actually reduce speed physically as well as just the signs. So you can't just rely on signs fundamentally, is our experience.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. I think sometimes it's just a lack of information, you know, as to why we can't have things, you know. So if we get the information and the reasoning is sound, then, well, the reasoning is sound. There's not a lot we can do about it. Anybody else? Councillor Fairley-Sagan.
Thank you for that, Paul. Yes, aside from Councillor Kennedy's recommendations for a blanket 20-mile-an-hour zone and the possibility of a trial school streets in Hexham, I'm delighted that traffic calming measures are being introduced, or there's money for it, and £500,000 for the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits on schools. My quick question is, are the signs advisory or compulsory here? Because I've heard that quite a lot of them that go up are actually only advisory. Are we, what are the ones that are being proposed around schools?
So it'll be, if it's 21 lights flash, they are advisory signs. So it's when they flash, they'll be for an hour in the morning, hour in the afternoon type of thing. But they're not enforceable, they're just advisory.
Right.
It's difficult. You can get the one on Allendale Road, it's what they call a variable limit, which is enforceable by the police, but it's very complicated. It's a complicated process and difficult for the enforcement of a variable. So it's other authorities have used advisory signs like this, so we've gone down that route. Unless, of course, we're doing a permanent limit, in which case it is enforceable.
Okay.
So any places where there's a permanent 20, they are enforceable.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, that's a lot quicker than I thought it was going to be. Thank you very much, boys. We'll see you and argue with you later on at another time. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 10 now, which is the land at Mickley Square, application for land to be registered as a town or village green. And for this, we're going to have Helen Lancaster, who's going to set this up, and then members ask questions afterwards if required.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for dealing with this application. This application is perhaps slightly unusual. We don't find many of them that actually come to committee. But this item concerns an application for village green status in relation to land at Buick Green, Mickley Square, Stocksfield. As the report confirms, the council is the Commons Registration Authority and is obliged to amend the register of village greens where any land in Northumberland becomes a town or village green within the meaning of the Commons Act 2006. So in January 19, the council, as Commons Registration Authority, received an application on the statutory form for registration of land at Buick Green. And this application was supported by 24 signed statements as to user of the land. And there is a copy of the application in your papers. The application was then advertised in accordance with the regulations, and only one representation was received. That was from the Highways Authority, but this was then withdrawn when the applicant agreed to exclude the highways from the application land. So the application was then considered in detail at a virtual non-statutory public inquiry, and that was on the 3rd of March 2021, with Mr James Marrick, an independent barrister, being appointed to act as inspector. So applications for village green status are treated differently to, say, planning applications, which obviously you've just heard. There are no policies to consider. You cannot consider the merits or otherwise of any future developments of the land. I should say that, as far as I'm aware, that there are no proposals to develop the land. But the sole consideration is whether all and each of the statutory grounds have been proved on the balance of probabilities. and the burden of proving that the land has become a town or village green lies with the applicant. So, just for the sake of completeness, the statutory grounds for registration under section 15.2 of the Commons Act 2006 are that a significant number of the inhabitants of any locality or of any neighbourhood within a locality have indulged, as of right, in lawful sports and pastimes on the land for a period of at least 20 years, and that they continue to do so at the time of the application. The Inspector's report is at page 107 of your papers, and you'll see that the Inspector goes through the relevant case law and evidence with regard to each of the criteria above. And I should say there is a lot of case law in relation to really each of those criteria. The Inspector confirms that the real question for him, having considered all the evidence before him, and when considering all of the statutory grounds, was whether there was evidence of a significant number of local residents within the neighbourhood using the land for lawful sports and pastimes. And his conclusion was that the applicant had not been able to demonstrate sufficient quality of user. He comments that the main user was children playing and dog walking, but that the use had not been heavy. It was only children in the immediate vicinity that had used the land, and therefore there were only a limited pool of children to use the land. Also, there were other larger spaces in the village that children could use, so that the application land itself did not have much of a draw for children. Dog walkers, he thought, used the land as a stop-off area rather than it actually being a destination. And he thought that the annual barbecue mentioned in the application did not give overall weight to the overall sufficiency of user. So you'll see, Chair, that the Inspector's opinion and recommendation was therefore that the application must fail because a significant number of local inhabitants have not indulged in lawful sports and pastimes for the relevant 20-year period, and his recommendation is therefore that the application should be dismissed. So bearing in mind the experience and expertise of the Council's appointed Inspector and the detailed scrutiny he has put the application through, members are accordingly recommended to adopt the recommendation of the Inspector, namely that the application to register the land as a village green should be rejected. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Helen. I'll start off with a very short one, hopefully, which is on page 113 of the Inspector's report, mentions over the 20-year period, which you've mentioned before. And, you know, you often hear people saying, oh, well, it's done this and that for 20 years, so therefore it now becomes ours and what have you. And I think that's obviously a little bit of a misunderstanding, shall we say. So when you talk about something being used constantly for 20 years, this is section 37 I'm looking at, by the way. Are we talking about, could it be one day a week, say used as a football pitch for a team for 20 odd years? Obviously not somebody who just walks over the, or is it somebody who just walks over the green, walking the dog constantly? And certainly not a 20-year run of a barbecue once a year.
Yes, and that's the Inspector's point, really, that the you know, the evidence that was presented to him of, you know, the occasional dog walker, only kind of very local children playing occasionally, and certainly an annual barbecue, he thought would not be sufficient user.
Yeah. Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Helen. So I've always been interested in Village Green. I'm glad I've been on this council many years now. It's the first time I think I've seen this actually come through. But I have read about Village Green's status before, so I find this really fascinating actually to see it, you know, turned into from a principle into a piece of practice. So I'm not going to dispute the evidence. So I'll be supporting what's been said in the report, because why would you vote anything different? I've got no evidence to suggest otherwise. But I think like Trevor's just said, I think it's really interesting to see what constitutes village green status, and you know, and what evidence that is, you know, that just a casual dog walker, casual, you know, children playing on that land is not sufficient. You know, there needs to be more regular activity by the community for it to be judged as a village green. So so yeah, I'll support the recommendation on that basis. But I'm really fascinated to read this, I must say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Riddle, question, please.
It wasn't really a question, it was a comment. Am I allowed to comment, or are you just doing questions at the moment?
Why not? I'm feeling very good tonight.
Well, I think Councillor Sharp and I have the war wounds from what went on at Haltwhistle. And, you know, I guess, and my learned friend here. But, you know, these are very legal matters, and they take a long time to be decided. We had lots of public meetings and, you know, and all the rest. But, you know, we might as well cut to the chase here and just accept the officer's opinion and, you know, move on, because we can't do anything about it. That's it. And
I'm happy to cut the chase, but I mean, you know, we do have an officer here, and if the people want to ask questions, I'm more than welcome to give them a chance to ask. Councillor Morfitt.
This is a comment rather than a question, if that's okay. Thank you. I very much appreciate the report. I found it very interesting, and I'm inclined to agree with the inspector's recommendation. I just feel the need to mention the amount of paper and ink that's got into printing email conversations. There might be a legal requirement for it, but 305 pages of email conversations, most of it duplication, much of it actually repeating the plea to consider the environment by asking yourself if you need a hard copy before you print it. So just wondering if it might be possible to avoid so much duplication in future, and perhaps whether similar correspondence could be sent by email instead.
Thank you very much, Nick. You're lucky, 305 pages. I've got 508, but never mind. Funny enough, we were just talking about this at another meeting the other day, and the fact is, a lot of people, myself included, can't go through 508 pages on a computer screen. I would do my head in, something rotten. And I'm presuming it is a legal requirement for everything to be out there, or in a maybe a more limited form.
Chair, yes, in this instance, the inspector did recommend in his report that the inquiry bundle be attached to the report. So that's why we have so many pages, because you've got the inquiry bundle and the inspector's report and my report.
I believe our clerk didn't send everything out to everybody anyway, did you? Or did you?
The full report was sent to the members of the committee. It was not sent to the planning officers, and vice versa. Helen didn't get the planning officer's report. No. And it was limited distribution to other parties that normally get the agenda papers. So it was, the full 500 and odd pages of the report was limited to the people present at the meeting now.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Dale.
Thank you very much. I do recall, I think, Councillor Sharp and Councillor Riddle, but actually this has been quite composed, this application. And actually I agree with the outcome of the inspector. They do take a long time. And actually, in some ways, the amount of time and amount of cost to the council is quite exorbitant, really. I'm not sure. I know we used to have a lawyer who, I don't know if you do, but how many you've done since you've ever been here. But they're very rare because they're very difficult. And I think some of the ones that really have come through are really big ones. Alan, yours was a big one, wasn't it? And this is, in fact, is a very, very small area. It's a tiny area. And I think that was the concern that a lot of people had, because actually the area was so small. But as the inspector said, there wasn't enough area to actually make a use of it. But also there's bigger areas in the village. So you do have the sports field, you do have the playground, you do have big greens, which actually are not registered. But the outcome is sound, and I will support that. And thank you for your hard work on this, because it has gone on, but there's no acrimony at all. It's just time.
Thank you very much. Last call for Councillor Sharp?
Yeah, I also agree with the inspector's decision. But interestingly, of course, if there was no comments from the parish council very much in it, but in the Holbustle case, the cost of the county council officers doing the work, that's always the problem here. And I wouldn't hate to estimate how much time Helen and her team have spent on this to get to this decision. So I actually welcome the report, but it's gone on a long time this now. And in the Holbustle case, it cost the council 40-odd thousand. I bet it cost the county council considerably more. So let's get it approved. Let's get the recommendation approved and move on.
Thank you very much. Last chance. Eyes down. No one? Okay. As somebody said, they don't come here that often, these ones. And I think that was a pretty comprehensive report. It was quite hard to argue much with what you said. And thanks very much, Helen, for coming here tonight and presenting that.
Helen, do you want that moved and seconded?
It would better had, yes.
I was actually coming to that, honestly. I've got it here ready to say. But, okay, well, I'll just say what the recommendation is, just before anybody says anything. The recommendation is to adopt the recommendation of the Inspector, Mr James Marwick, namely that the application to register land at Bewick Green, Mickley Square, Stocksfield as a town or village green be rejected. Councillor Kennedy, are you going to... Yeah, I'll approve. You're recommending acceptance of this recommendation. How many recommendations can I say in one go? Councillor Stewart, you're seconding that. Okay, so all those in favour of the recommendation, as said? That's unanimous, unless I've missed somebody. No. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Right, I've got a note off our clerk, which I meant to read out before that. Our Democratic Services Officer, I should call it. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you clerk. And that is just found a slight error in some of the minutes that went out earlier. Nothing to do with the minutes, it's the numbering of these minutes. So for Tuesday, the 11th of January, if you intend, because some people keep all the documents, if you do that, you'll see the numbered 1 to 7, which is an error. They should have been numbered continuously, so they should actually be numbered 73 to 81. So if you wish to keep those, and then you need to amend the numbers from 73 through to 73 through to 81. Right then. Sorry? Well, I know you keep all your documents, Councillor Kennedy. Mine are keeping that storage vessel just over there. 73 to 81, Councillor Stewart, yes. I'm pleased you got that. Right then, moving on to item number 11. The date of next meeting. The next meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 15th of March 2022, and for the benefit of Councillor Sharp, at a venue to be informed later. Nicola, do we have any urgent business?
No, Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much all for attending tonight. Turn off the live feed, please, Ian, if you